Hey guys, tonight we drift into the fog-draped stillness of 19th-century Recanati, Italy, an unremarkable village that gave the world one of its most melancholy minds. You sit up in bed, fluff the pillow behind your back, and imagine your breath misting in the chilly morning air as the town remains cloaked in a sleepy hush. A bell tolls somewhere, but it sounds like it doesn't care whether anyone's listening. Everything is calm. Still. Just a little too still. You probably won't survive this level of introspection, honestly. Leopardi barely did, and he started young. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the cobbled streets of Recanati in soft slippers. Leopardi's ghost might roll his eyes at your footwear, but he would approve of your introspective gait. The air tastes faintly of damp stone and something like old paper, and maybe it's just your imagination, but even the pigeons here seem pensive. The world Giacomo Leopardi was born into in 1798 was both extraordinarily boring and existentially loud. His aristocratic family had a massive library and an even bigger collection of unmet expectations. His father was a scholar with political delusions, and his mother was so deeply religious she seemed almost allergic to joy. This delightful cocktail gave birth to a boy who questioned everything before most kids learn how to throw a rock. You glance up toward the Palazzo Leopardi, his childhood home, and possibly the only structure in Recanati with more books than living souls. Inside, a young Giacomo squints into candlelight, already reading Plato and Pliny while other kids are eating bread crusts and yelling about sheep. Historians still argue whether Leopardi's philosophical outlook stemmed more from his repressive upbringing or from his rapidly deteriorating health. By age 12, he had scoliosis, chronic eye strain, and the disposition of someone who just found out puppies aren't real. His tutors taught him Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and despair. What's especially surreal is how the quiet sadness of Recanati shaped him, not through tragedy, but through absence. There was no great war, no plague, no betrayal. Just a gentle erosion of hope, one slow, foggy morning after another. His mind turned inward, and then further inward, and then down a philosophical spiral so deep it makes modern doom-scrolling look like a mindfulness retreat. You pass an ancient stone bench where he likely sat, pen in hand, squinting at the sky like it owed him answers. A cloud drifts by and doesn't even pause to be profound. Typical. Mainstream history likes to peg Leopardi as a romantic poet, but even he would have sighed heavily at that label. Where romanticism often glows with idealism and love, Leopardi's work feels more like a wool sweater soaked in rain, textured, beautiful, but ultimately damp and a little itchy. He wrote about nature, yes, but not because he thought it was uplifting. More because it was brutally honest. Take, for example, his early reflections on beauty. Most kids would describe a sunset as pretty. Leopardi looked at the same sunset and said, yes, but it's also a burning reminder that everything ends, and even light dies eventually. The man didn't exactly get invited to many birthday parties. One quirky tidbit, even as a child, Leopardi was known for walking around town muttering philosophical questions under his breath. Some villagers thought he was talking to angels. Others just avoided eye contact. But there was something magnetic about him, he radiated thought. Like a brooding candle in an otherwise dim town. You step into a small courtyard where weeds press up through the cracks. The kind of place that's always a little too silent. You sit, cross-legged, and picture young Giacomo doing the same. He's thinking about death again. Not because he wants to, but because everything around him feels so temporary. The wind picks up for a second and then forgets what it was doing. Even nature seems indifferent. What makes Leopardi so quietly compelling is that he didn't shout his truths. He whispered them. He didn't declare that life was meaningless with rage, he just noticed it, sighed, and kept writing. It's not despair with teeth. It's despair with spectacles, a bad back, and an ink-stained sleeve. Historians still debate whether Recanati truly imprisoned him, or if he would have written the same verses had he been born in Paris or Vienna. But it's hard to ignore how much that sleepy little town, with its fog and silence, carved itself into his soul. It taught him that nothingness doesn't have to be loud. That the quiet parts of life are often the heaviest. And so, as you drift deeper into this journey, the sky over Recanati darkens, not with storm clouds, but with that kind of soft velvet black that feels like the universe's eyelids. You tuck your hands under your blanket, or maybe just into the folds of a dream, and prepare to descend further into Leopardi's curious world of gentle sorrow and sharp insight. You walk through the creaking corridor of the Palazzo Leopardi, ducking slightly to avoid the low-hung beams, though Leopardi himself, short and stooped from years of physical pain, probably never needed to. The walls here are thick with silence, and just ahead, there it is, the library. A room so packed with parchment and dust that it smells like time forgot to air itself out. This is where he lived, not just in body, but in mind. You can almost hear the scrape of a wooden chair as a boy pulls himself up to a stack of books taller than his hopes. Light slants through a single window, the kind of light that makes dust particles look like they're thinking. That's where Leopardi sat most of the time, window to his left, oblivion straight ahead. He read everything. Greek tragedy. Latin philosophy. Hebrew scriptures. The Enlightenment, the ancients, the obscure. His favorites? Cicero for clarity, Lucretius for melancholy, and Horace for his deeply suspicious optimism. Scholars still argue whether his reading was guided or compulsive, whether he had a plan, or just binged ideas like a teenager discovering conspiracy videos at 2 a.m. His eyes gave up on him early. By 14, he had already written extensive academic essays in classical languages and had also discovered that squinting too much makes your spine curl like an apologetic shrimp. But he couldn't stop. Reading became not just escape, but defiance. If life offered him no joy, then knowledge would. You peer over his shoulder, hypothetically of course, and see his notes, margins full of furious scribbles, arrows connecting unrelated ideas, words underlined 3 times. He wasn't reading passively, he was interrogating the universe. Somewhere in those texts, he believed, there had to be a reason why we feel so fundamentally betrayed by being alive. You run your hand along the spines of the books. Some are thick as bricks, bound in leather that's seen better centuries. One fringe fact you'd never guess, this very library contained more than 20,000 volumes, many in original languages, all meticulously catalogued by his father, who, incidentally, treated organization as a form of control. So yes, little Giacomo read in 4 languages while also absorbing quiet authoritarianism 1 volume at a time. It's oddly beautiful. A lonely kid, shut off from the world, trying to swallow it whole by reading every last word it ever wrote. If Netflix existed back then, he'd have finished the entire platform by age 15 and still complained about the ending. Through the window, you watch the seasons turn in slow motion. Summer makes the library too warm, and winter too damp, but Giacomo stays put, coughing occasionally, a living metaphor for persistence. He's teaching himself German now, because apparently being multilingual in dead languages wasn't sufficiently punishing. And here's the twist, he doesn't do it out of ambition. He's not trying to impress anyone. He's not driven by career or money. He just wants to understand. Why does beauty fade? Why does time hurt? Why do humans chase dreams that disappear the moment they're touched? Just a casual Tuesday in this kid's mind. Historians still debate if his environment was prison or sanctuary. Could he have found the same thought somewhere livelier, somewhere louder? Maybe. But that window, his only real link to the outside, gave him just enough distance to see life clearly. Like staring through glass at an aquarium of human nonsense. Now, let's take a moment for a joke to soften the blow. If you ever feel overwhelmed by your to-read pile, just remember Giacomo Leopardi taught himself ancient Greek to complain more eloquently. He begins writing poetry now. You watch him draft verses that are elegant, rhythmic, and quietly devastating. One of his early pieces, composed in that very room, compares humanity to a child crying in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Sleep, in his poetry, is never restful, it's a cousin of death, or worse, a rehearsal for disappointment. There's a strange sort of warmth here, though. Because even in all his isolation, Leopardi found something sustaining in the act of thinking. In every dusty volume, there's a friend, a rival, a ghost to debate with. And when he writes, it's not for applause, it's to argue back at existence. One lesser-known tidbit, at one point, he believed the moon might be conscious. Not in a mystical way, but as a symbol of indifferent watching. He'd stare at her through the window and wonder if she noticed him back. Spoiler, she didn't. But the thought was oddly comforting, if someone, even a celestial orb, could witness his quiet, aching brilliance, maybe it wasn't for nothing. Outside, Recanati continues its slow march into another quiet night. You feel your own eyelids getting heavier. Not because you're bored, well, maybe a little, but because the rhythm of his thoughts is lulling. There's something tender in how completely he gave himself to thought, as if it were the only honest thing left. You close the library door behind you. The creak sounds like an old sigh. Somewhere in those books is every answer Leopardi never got. But he kept looking. And maybe that's enough. You step out of the library into the garden, where the plants pretend not to hear your existential sigh. A small violet sways in the breeze like it knows something you don't. Leopardi spent many an hour here, watching nature in all its blue Mandai glory, and you begin to see why it both thrilled and betrayed him. There's a bee buzzing somewhere to your left, deeply invested in a flower that will be gone in a week. It's the kind of scene Instagram would love. But to Leopardi, nature didn't stage this moment for beauty. It staged it because that's what nature does. No purpose. No moral. No apology. Just unthinking cycles of growth, decay, repeat. As you settle onto a cracked stone bench, you remember his famous passage, "Nature has made man for unhappiness." That's right. While other poets were busy writing love songs to the sunrise, Leopardi was side-eyeing the daisies and asking, what are you really trying to pull here? Historians still argue whether he genuinely hated nature or if he was just projecting his own internal weather forecast onto the clouds. But his writings are clear, nature looks beautiful, but don't trust her. She doesn't care about you. At best, she's indifferent. At worst, she's a scam artist with great lighting. It's not that he missed the aesthetic appeal. Quite the opposite. He saw it too clearly. The way petals unfold. The softness of moss. The warm cruelty of spring, bringing back life only so it can suffer again. Leopardi believed that beauty draws you in, makes you believe in meaning, and then abandons you like a sitcom dad. One quirky tidbit, he once wrote a dialogue between nature and a shepherd. Nature, played by herself, basically tells the shepherd to quit whining, suffering is just part of the deal, and no, there's no manager to speak to. It's like an ancient Yelp review of existence, 1 star, cannot recommend. You trace a finger along the leaf of a nearby bush. It's soft, deceptively so. Just like life. A butterfly flutters past, and you catch yourself admiring its colors before remembering it'll be dead in a week. Then you feel guilty for thinking that, which Leopardi would have found funny. He once said consciousness is just enough awareness to notice how much everything hurts, but not enough to change it. You glance up at the sky, where a few wispy clouds drift like they're bored. This is what he called the veil, nature dresses herself in loveliness to mask her uncaring essence. He saw poetry in it, yes, but also manipulation. She draws you in, fills your lungs with fresh air, and then reminds you you're biodegradable. Yet for all his cynicism, Leopardi didn't suggest burning the forest down. He kept walking through it, watching, listening, writing. He didn't seek revenge on nature. He just wanted honesty. If she had simply said, hey, you're here for a short, kind of miserable time, but at least you get sunsets, he might have felt a little better. There's something almost comforting in the frankness of his view. No false promises. No cheap optimism. Just a steady, observational sorrow. Like someone watching the waves roll in, knowing they'll wash away his name in the sand, and being okay with it. You stand now, brushing moss from your pants, and look around the garden. It's peaceful. It's beautiful. It's also quietly ruthless. That tiny ant hauling a crumb doesn't know it's part of a system that doesn't care if it lives or dies. And honestly, you sort of envy its ignorance. One mainstream fact to toss in: during Leopardi's time, the Romantic movement in Europe was painting nature as the great healer. Poets like Wordsworth and Shelley were skipping through daisy fields, feeling deeply restored. Leopardi, meanwhile, was like, cool field. Shame it's going to rot soon. You walk a little further and see a willow tree, hunched like it's been listening to too much Radiohead. Leopardi probably liked this one. He often compared human life to plants, rooted, fragile, and entirely at the mercy of weather systems we can't control. You pause beneath its branches, letting them sway just above your head like a ceiling of soft, leafy indifference. Historians still debate how much of his bitterness was poetic exaggeration. Was he really that grim, or was he using his gloom to say something deeper? Maybe he didn't hate nature. Maybe he just hated how we keep misunderstanding her. We expect her to soothe us, to heal us, to whisper secrets about the universe. But she's not your therapist. She's not even your friend. She's the ongoing, unconscious backdrop to whatever absurd drama humans are performing today. And yet, he still walked through the garden. He still looked. Still listened. He couldn't stop himself from searching for meaning, even as he insisted there wasn't any. That's the heart of Leopardi, not rage, but a weary curiosity. A desire to understand what hurts, and why. The breeze kicks up again. A few leaves tumble across the stone path. Somewhere, a bird calls once and then goes silent. You close your eyes. In this garden of soft betrayals, you feel something shift, not peace, exactly. Not joy. But recognition. Like nature finally turned, met your gaze, and nodded. Then looked away again. You return indoors, not because the garden was done with you, but because Leopardi's thoughts about happiness don't bloom in sunlight. They fester better in lamplight. You descend the old stone stairs to the study, a room packed with notebooks, drafts, and the smell of candle wax and intellectual resignation. Here, you pull up a chair. Not a metaphorical one this time, an actual rickety chair that creaks like it's trying to warn you. On the desk lies an open volume, beside it a note in Leopardi's scrawl: to live is to suffer disappointment. Cozy stuff. Tonight's lullaby is about the illusion of happiness. According to Leopardi, your joy is like a very enthusiastic stray cat, cute at first, until it bites and vanishes under the couch forever. He didn't think happiness was impossible. He just thought it was deeply misunderstood. We confuse momentary pleasure with enduring satisfaction. Like eating a spoonful of Nutella and assuming we've achieved spiritual enlightenment. To Leopardi, every pleasure contains the seeds of its own expiration. The joy fades. The craving doesn't. You know that feeling when your food delivery arrives late, but you're still grateful? That's what he'd call a micro-illusion of happiness. The bar gets so low you start applauding crumbs. He argued that we build castles in the air just to stand in their rubble a moment later and sigh, at least the view was nice. Mainstream historians agree that this theme, the futility of pleasure, runs through nearly all of his work. His 1824 piece, The Dialogue of Fashion and Death, personifies fashion as a chatty, sparkling socialite who doesn't realize she's walking hand in hand with mortality. Together, they giggle on their way to irrelevance. Brutal. Accurate. One fringe tidbit: Leopardi once entertained the idea that boredom is a more accurate gauge of human nature than desire. Not because we lack things to do, but because we lack things worth doing. The mind, when unstimulated, reveals its true face, and it mostly looks like someone standing in front of the fridge for no reason. He thought pleasure was inherently brief, because the moment you acquire the thing you want, your imagination, which is the only part that made it appealing in the first place, collapses. A holiday. A lover. A career milestone. They all shimmer like treasure maps until the moment you arrive and realize it's just sand. So, you sit in his study, feeling a bit like someone who just realized their lifelong dream was actually a hologram. But rather than wallow, you begin to laugh. Because there's something oddly freeing in knowing this isn't your fault. Leopardi isn't judging you for wanting more, he's just pointing out that more was never going to cut it. Historians still debate whether his philosophy was pessimistic or simply realistic. Did he believe the pursuit of happiness was doomed? Or just overhyped? Some scholars argue he wasn't a pessimist at all, but a kind of tragic realist, someone who sees the fall before the leap and decides to walk instead. Leopardi wrote that humans are unique in their ability to imagine infinite happiness. And that's the curse. Because nothing in the world can actually live up to that projection. Nature gives you hunger, gives you food, but your brain, that overachiever, adds dreams and longing and metaphors and ruins the whole thing. You pick up a journal entry of his from the 1820s, and it reads like a message in a bottle from someone who tried joy, found it too slippery, and now prefers honest discontent. The illusion is necessary, he wrote. But the moment you see through it, it no longer comforts. It's why he admired ancient civilizations, not because they were happier, but because they were better at distracting themselves. Gladiators. Mysteries. Orgies. Everyone had something to scream about. Meanwhile, modern man just stares at a wall, wondering if his purpose can be downloaded. You turn the page. He's drawn a small cartoon, yes, really. A stick figure chasing a balloon labeled Felicita, happiness. The next frame. The balloon pops. The stick figure shrugs. Honestly, it's the most relatable thing you've seen all week. What's lovely about Leopardi's honesty is that it softens the edges of personal failure. Didn't get the promotion. Didn't win the love. Didn't finish that novel. That's not a you problem. That's just reality playing out as usual. The system was rigged, not to harm you, necessarily, but certainly not to comfort you. And maybe, just maybe, there's a kind of serenity in not chasing happiness like it owes you something. You lean back in the chair, nearly falling, it really is that rickety, and consider what it might mean to live without the pressure to be constantly fulfilled. To accept that life is a string of small, momentary pleasures, each one quietly evaporating before you even name it. You hear the wind outside again. A distant dog barks. Somewhere, a candle guttering in its holder sighs itself to sleep. You close the notebook gently. Leopardi knew the chase would never end. But he also knew that if you stopped running for a second, just long enough to sit in the stillness, you might hear something more important than joy. You might hear the truth. You find yourself standing by a window again, only this time it overlooks a dusty horizon. Your gaze slips into the distance, past the rooftops, past the rolling fields, toward that shimmer just at the edge of sight. The place where possibilities pretend to live. Leopardi called this the island illusion, the belief that happiness, meaning, or something deeply satisfying lies just out of reach. It's a mirage. A tomorrow that always stays tomorrow. A vacation brochure for the soul. You've probably booked a few metaphorical trips there yourself. You picture Odysseus, drifting from shore to shore in Homer's epic, always hoping the next island might be home. Leopardi saw in him not just a hero, but a tragic optimist, forever seeking, never arriving. That's the human condition, he argued, always one port short of peace. Historians still argue whether Leopardi admired Odysseus or pitied him. Was he an emblem of noble struggle or a cautionary tale? The debate continues, mostly in sleepy academic circles where coffee consumption exceeds philosophical breakthroughs. Leopardi wrote often about longing, not the passionate, fiery kind, but the cold ache of desiring something that doesn't exist. We dream up lives we're not living, places we're not in, people we've never met. Then feel sad when they don't show up. It's like ghosting yourself. You step away from the window, pacing slowly across the room. The floorboards creak like old thoughts. You imagine the letters Leopardi wrote about this illusion, scribbled at midnight, lamenting how our minds always paint elsewhere in golden hues, while here remains stubbornly beige. One quirky tidbit: he once theorized that the most miserable people are those who achieve their dreams. Why? Because now they know what's on the other side, and it's not paradise. It's just another Tuesday with higher expectations. You sit on the edge of a bed so old it probably remembers the French Revolution. The sheets are coarse, the mattress lumpy, but you lie down anyway. Above you, a crack in the ceiling stretches like a lazy metaphor. You think about that distant island again, the job, the house, the relationship, the version of yourself that finally gets it. Leopardi believed these imagined lands exist only in the space between thought and reality. The moment you step onto them, they vanish. Like waking from a dream where everything felt right, only to open your eyes and find your alarm clock glaring back at you. He wasn't cruel about it, though. He just wanted you to know that it's okay to long for something and never find it. That maybe the longing itself is what makes you human. You reach, not because you're broken, but because you're built that way. In one of his lesser-known essays, he described hope as the only illusion we demand never be taken from us. Not because it works, but because it moves us. Without it, we'd collapse like underbaked soufflés. With it, we at least keep baking. You sit up slightly, propping yourself on your elbows, and let the silence settle around you. You realize something Leopardi hinted at often: the island isn't real, but the journey is. That restless yearning is the story. The plot. The character arc. You're not failing by not arriving, you're succeeding by continuing to seek. There's a comfort in this reversal. You don't have to hate your dissatisfaction. It's not a flaw. It's your compass. A compass that, admittedly, doesn't point north, but does keep you moving. Mainstream history paints Leopardi as a pessimist, but this idea, this specific one, is oddly hopeful. He's saying it's okay not to be okay. That maybe joy isn't a place, but a kind of quiet persistence. A willingness to wander, even when the map is fake. Outside, the wind picks up. A faint rustle of olive trees whispers through the wall. You imagine a young Leopardi listening too, wondering if the breeze carried a secret. It didn't. It never does. But he wrote about it anyway, as if it might one day say something new. You lie back down. The ceiling crack above you looks a little less threatening now. More like a road map. Twisted, unfinished, going nowhere in particular, but drawn with conviction. As your eyes begin to drift shut, you hold on to the faint shimmer of that imaginary island, not to reach it, but just to keep walking. Because, as Leopardi knew too well, sometimes what saves you isn't the destination. It's the longing itself. Your feet press against a gravel path. Somewhere behind you, the garden and study dissolve into the mist. Ahead, there's a gentle hill. It rises not with drama, but with the quiet confidence of something that knows you'll want to climb it. This is the hill. Not metaphorically. Literally. The one in Recanati where Leopardi wrote L'Infinito, his most famous poem. You begin the ascent, your steps slow and careful. The gravel crunches underfoot like soft applause. The hill is modest in size but massive in implication. From its peak, Leopardi stared at the horizon and imagined infinity. Not the kind with stars and galaxies, but the kind that whispers from just beyond the edge of perception. A forever you can't see, but somehow feel. He described standing there with a hedge blocking his view, yes, an actual hedge. That ordinary obstruction became a metaphor for the limits of human understanding. We want to see everything, but something always gets in the way, a doubt, a memory, a mortgage. Historians still debate whether L'Infinito is about transcendence or terror. Is it a poem of spiritual expansion or existential vertigo? The academic jury is still out, probably sipping espresso and arguing about enjambment. You reach the top, and there's a bench waiting. Wooden, worn, and utterly perfect. You sit. The landscape stretches far and wide, but your gaze, like Leopardi's, doesn't fix on what's there. It drifts to what isn't. One quirky tidbit: when the poem was first published, some readers assumed that infinite was religious. They thought it was God peeking through the trees. Leopardi, however, never confirmed that. In fact, he leaned toward cosmic indifference. If the universe noticed him at all, it was probably with a shrug. He wrote, "And drowning is sweet to me in this sea." That's the final line of the poem. Drowning. Not flying. Not floating. Drowning, in the vastness, in the immensity of thought. But sweetly. As if obliteration wasn't terrifying, but oddly comforting. Because at least it's something bigger than your tax return. You close your eyes and try to feel what he did. Not see, but feel. That moment where time folds in on itself. Where you're both insignificant and somehow deeply connected. Like a single syllable in a long, unread book. Leopardi believed that facing infinity was a gift, even if it hurt. He didn't flinch from it. He leaned in. Let it swallow him. And then came back with a poem that still stirs people 2 centuries later. There's something beautifully contradictory here. He paints infinity as this vast, unknowable thing, but describes it in such intimate, precise language. It's like trying to summarize the ocean with a teaspoon. But he tries anyway, and somehow it works. You take a deep breath. The air here is lighter. Maybe it's the altitude, or maybe it's that strange freedom you feel when you stop pretending things make sense. You don't have to solve life. You don't even have to understand it. You just have to stand here, at the edge of everything, and admit that you don't know. Mainstream history remembers L'Infinito as Leopardi's most serene work. But read between the lines and you'll find anxiety braided into the calm. He wasn't at peace. He was just more articulate about his confusion than most. You lie back on the grass now, the blades prickling your neck. Above, the sky stretches out in indifferent blue. No signposts. No instructions. Just space. And maybe that's enough. Historians still argue whether Leopardi found comfort in the infinite or merely distraction. Was he soothed, or sedated? No one knows. But the fact that he kept returning to that hill says something. He didn't stop questioning. He didn't stop imagining. And here you are 2 centuries later. On the same hill. Asking the same questions. A breeze moves past your ears like a whisper that forgot its words. You let yourself drown for a moment, in thought, in silence, in this vast, uncaring beauty. And somehow, just like he said, it's sweet. You walk downhill now, the gravel whispering under your soles. The sun dips low behind Recanati, casting long shadows that stretch like old regrets. As you wander into town again, you pass a corner where 2 lovers once carved their initials into a tree. The bark has healed over, but the scar remains, like love itself in Leopardi's mind. For him, love wasn't a promise. It was a hallucination wearing perfume. He wanted it, deeply, achingly, but he also knew it lied. Leopardi fell in love multiple times. Mostly from a distance. Often unrequited. He wrote letters soaked in yearning, entire poems about women who barely noticed he existed. Each time, he seemed to know he was walking into disappointment, and yet, he walked anyway. Historians still argue whether these were actual relationships or elaborate emotional cosplays. Some scholars think he crafted his beloveds from fragments of real people and idealized them to poetic perfection, then blamed them when they failed to live up to his fantasy. Classic move. You pause at a stone wall, warm from the last of the day's sun, and consider his poem Aspasia, named after a woman he adored who didn't return his affection. In it, he peels away the romantic facade, revealing not a muse but a mirror. One that reflected his own illusions back at him. He saw love as beautiful, yes, but in the same way a mirage is beautiful. From a distance, it sparkles. Up close, it vanishes. Desire was, to him, a kind of exquisite self-deception. You want what you can never really have because what you want is an idea, not a person. One quirky tidbit, he once described love as the highest form of delusion permitted by nature. Which, when you think about it, is both hilarious and kind of accurate. Flowers bloom, hormones dance, sonnets get written, and meanwhile, nature quietly keeps the species going. You stroll past an empty bench in the town square. Maybe Leopardi sat here once, watching couples pass by, wondering how many were genuinely happy and how many were just auditioning for it. He might have smiled, just slightly, and scribbled something about the performance of affection. To him, love wasn't a cure for loneliness, it was its most convincing costume. It gave people a script to follow: longing, confession, ecstasy, collapse. But underneath it, the same aching silence always returned. Like the encore of a concert no one really enjoyed but applauded anyway. Mainstream history often glosses over how funny Leopardi could be about this. Yes, his heartbreaks were real. But his observations? Razor sharp. He once wrote that lovers spend so much time describing their beloved that they forget to know them. Because knowing someone ruins the dream. You sit now, just to rest, and imagine how love must have felt to him. Like standing outside a warm house in winter. Light glowing from the windows. Laughter inside. And you, alone on the steps, convincing yourself that if you wait long enough, someone will notice. He never quite got in. But he never stopped hoping, either. That's the secret buried in all his cynicism, a sliver of stubborn belief. He wanted to believe in love. Needed to. Even if he thought it was a scam. Historians still debate whether his rejection of love was emotional self-defense or philosophical clarity. Was he guarding a bruised heart or reporting from the front lines of truth? Maybe both. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that he kept writing about it. He wrote love poems with the precision of a surgeon, cutting through fantasy to find the pulse underneath. Not to kill the dream, but to understand why it keeps breathing. You rise from the bench, the light dimming to a soft blue. A couple walks past, holding hands. You don't know their story. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's projection. Leopardi would suggest, probably both. And maybe that's the point. Maybe love doesn't have to be true to feel real. Maybe it's the only illusion we forgive. Because without it, the silence gets too loud. As the town folds into night, you turn one last glance toward that corner where the initials were carved. They're gone now. But the idea lingers. And ideas, Leopardi knew, are often stronger than people. You step off the cobbled street and onto a dirt path that winds through the edges of Recanati's countryside. Wild grass sways in disorganized rows. A butterfly meanders past like it forgot where it was going. You follow the path with your hands in your pockets, feeling the tug of something ancient, like walking backward through time. Leopardi often fantasized about a purer human being. Not the overly perfumed aristocrat or the blustering revolutionary, but the so-called noble savage. A person untainted by modern society's clutter, free, natural, and therefore, happier? Maybe. But no. Leopardi looked at this idea and said, nice try. He believed the noble savage was still miserable, just differently miserable. Swap city noise for howling wolves, and you still get insomnia. The wild doesn't erase suffering. It just changes its wardrobe. You crouch beside a creek now, watching the water tumble over rocks. There's something soothing about it, until you remember Leopardi would likely call it indifferent. It doesn't flow for you. It flows because gravity said so. Romanticism likes to imagine nature as your friend. Leopardi thought that was like befriending a vending machine, it only gives you what was programmed. Historians still argue whether he ever genuinely believed in a simpler life or if he used the noble savage as a straw man to critique both modern progress and backward nostalgia. Either way, he wasn't buying the idea that suffering is a city thing. It's a human thing. You could live in a hut and still panic over the meaning of life. One quirky tidbit, in one of his fictional dialogues, he imagines a wild man debating a civilized philosopher. Spoiler alert, the wild man loses. Not because he's wrong, but because he's equally sad, just less verbose about it. You walk a little further and find an open field, the kind with flowers that look like they're pretending to be cheerful. You lie back in the grass, arms spread wide. There's no traffic. No clock. Just the sky and its habit of not answering questions. Leopardi admired nature's clarity. It didn't pretend to love you. Unlike people. Unlike politics. He saw in nature a kind of brutal honesty, if it cuts you, it's not personal. If it rains, it doesn't mean anything. There's relief in that. You think of modern versions of the noble savage, the Instagrammer living in a yurt with Wi-Fi, the minimalist with 7 types of expensive tea. Leopardi would have raised one eyebrow and asked how existential dread tastes with matcha. His skepticism wasn't cruelty. It was discipline. He refused to romanticize what didn't deserve it. Whether it was ancient man or Enlightenment thinkers, he kept poking holes in their idealism. Not because he hated dreams, but because he couldn't let them blindfold him. Mainstream historians credit Leopardi with stripping the sentimental polish off ideas that were too pretty to be true. The noble savage wasn't noble, just unaware. That might sound cold, but Leopardi didn't think ignorance was bliss. He thought it was a temporary fog before the real storm hits. You pluck a blade of grass and let it slip through your fingers. It catches the light for a moment before vanishing into the breeze. That's how Leopardi saw innocence. Fleeting, always on the run, eventually caught by thought. And he trusted thought more than fantasy. Even painful thought. Especially painful thought. Because at least it was real. Historians still puzzle over how someone so bound to nature's cruelty could write so beautifully about it. Maybe that's the paradox, Leopardi didn't love nature for its kindness. He loved it for not lying. You close your eyes, the grass cradling you. Somewhere in this field, centuries ago, a young poet might have done the same. Imagined a world without civilization. Without deception. Then realized it didn't solve anything. That suffering wasn't something you built. It was something you are. And still, he kept imagining. You're back indoors, but now in a room that feels different. Not a study, not a library, more like a theater of ideas. The curtains are drawn, the air is hushed, and in the center sits a single candle, flickering over pages strewn with ink and thought. This is where Leopardi came to talk to art, not as a fan, but as a philosopher who didn't buy the hype. Art, he believed, was a glorious lie. A beautifully constructed deception. And yet, he loved it. Not because it cured anything, but because it distracted just well enough. You lean over the desk and flip through a notebook labeled Zibeldone. It's not a novel or even a poem, it's a sprawling philosophical journal Leopardi kept for over 15 years. Thousands of pages where he wrestled with reality, reason, and the quiet absurdity of trying to make meaning out of chaos. Mainstream historians treat the Zibeldone like a mind's blueprint. In it, you find his deepest convictions, that art is simultaneously futile and necessary. It doesn't fix unhappiness, but it articulates it in a way that almost feels like relief. One quirky tidbit, he once claimed that the purpose of poetry was to awaken illusions in a world stripped bare of them. Not to deceive, but to console. Like putting a soft blanket over a cracked floor, not because the crack is gone, but because it's too cold to lie on raw stone. You sit in a creaky chair again, facing a blank canvas leaning against the wall. Imagine painting on it. What would you choose? A stormy seascape? A quiet still life? Leopardi would probably paint a door leading nowhere. Or better yet, just the shadow of the door, implying a room that doesn't exist. Art, for him, wasn't truth. But it was honest about the lie. He admired that. He called it the noblest escape. A temporary vacation from despair, dressed in music, color, rhythm, rhyme. Historians still argue whether Leopardi thought art was a form of surrender or resistance. Did it help us endure life, or simply distract us long enough to forget how unbearable it is? He didn't pick a side. He lived in the tension. You hear the echo of footsteps in the hall. Not real, just the memory of artists, painters, composers, poets, who spent their lives trying to make sense of suffering by turning it into beauty. Leopardi joined them, but not to beautify sadness. To give it structure. A shape you could sit inside. You run a finger over a poem scribbled in haste. The ink is smudged, as if the words tried to escape. He writes of illusions again, those necessary dreams. He doesn't mock them. He builds them, fully aware of their fragility. Think about the last time a song made you cry. Or a film made you stare at the ceiling. Art doesn't solve the problem. But it nods in recognition. Leopardi cherished that nod. That fleeting, mutual moment where the lie was honest about being a lie. He wrote that we need illusions the way plants need sunlight, not because they're true, but because we wither without them. A painting of hope is still hope, even if you know it's just oil on canvas. You tilt your head back and stare at the ceiling, its paint flaking like an old fresco. You wonder if art is just a way to talk to ourselves when language fails. A kind of emotional translation. You can't say what you feel, but you can paint it. Or write it. Or whisper it to the stars. Leopardi would smile at that. Then remind you that the stars aren't listening. And yet, he wrote to them anyway. You emerge from the stillness of Leopardi's studio into a louder world. Horses clop past the window. A neighbor yells about bread prices. Somewhere, someone is passionately debating government over a very burnt espresso. You've just walked into 19th century Italy, and politics, progress, and yes, pasta are everywhere. Leopardi watched it all with a kind of pained bemusement. Revolutions were sparking, constitutions were being inked, philosophers were arguing about liberty, and Italy itself was trying to remember whether it was a country, a concept, or just a really stylish peninsula. Everyone was fired up about the future. Except him. To Leopardi, progress was not the shining arrow of hope many believed it to be. It was more like a wheel, rolling, impressive, but going in circles. He didn't dismiss invention or reform. He just questioned whether they ever addressed the core issue, human suffering. Historians still argue whether he was anti-modern or just deeply skeptical of idealism. He certainly wasn't conservative in the political sense. If anything, he thought both progressives and reactionaries missed the point, because neither camp acknowledged that unhappiness doesn't go away with better roads or faster mail. You sit at a wooden cafe table, the kind that wobbles no matter which way you turn it. On the menu, espresso, existential dread, and 2 kinds of ravioli. You order the dread. Leopardi didn't hate civilization. He just saw it as a very complicated way to keep people busy. Institutions rise and fall, cities burn and get rebuilt, and still, you lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering if you've disappointed your ancestors. Or your dog. One quirky tidbit, Leopardi once wrote that if humans truly believed in progress, they'd throw a global festival for each small improvement. Behold, he joked, probably while coughing, we have invented the umbrella. Let us weep less. But he didn't see much weeping reduction. He observed that the more advanced society became, the more refined its unhappiness grew. Ancient people suffered from famine and war. Modern people suffer from feeling insignificant on public transport. Both forms hurt. One just wears a waistcoat. You sip imaginary espresso and listen to the surrounding noise. A violin in the distance. A cart rolling past. It all feels very romantic, until you remember that most of this noise is just people trying not to be alone with their thoughts. Leopardi had a particular disdain for the Enlightenment's faith in reason. He admired clarity, yes, but reason alone couldn't warm a soul. It couldn't make you feel less like a cosmic accident. And for all the promises of liberty, equality, and fraternity, most people still felt like background extras in a play they didn't audition for. Mainstream history puts Leopardi among the most lucid critics of political optimism. He wasn't trying to ruin the party. He was just that quiet guest in the corner who leans in and whispers, "You know none of this changes death, right?" You walk along a stone road now, past government buildings with faded flags. Progress has been here. It paved the road, built the school, printed the newspaper. But the air still carries sighs. Someone still cries in the middle of lunch. Someone still lies awake wishing they hadn't said that one thing 10 years ago. Historians still debate whether Leopardi's political essays were meant to depress or awaken. Perhaps both. He didn't want people to stop fighting for justice, he just wanted them to do it without pretending it would solve existence itself. And through it all, he never gave up beauty. He still wrote. Still pondered. Still appreciated pasta, probably. Even he wasn't immune to good pasta. In fact, he once compared life to a dish of tagliatelle, perfectly presented, but cold by the time you get to the table. You laugh at that thought. It feels too true. As evening settles over Recanati, the political arguments quiet. The flags droop. The city breathes. And you realize Leopardi wasn't against change. He was just heartbreakingly aware that no system, no matter how fair or fast or fancy, can save us from the question, why do I still feel empty? And maybe that's okay. Maybe progress is worth pursuing, not because it will complete us, but because it gives us a reason to keep going. Like pasta. Slightly overcooked. Still good. You step into a room where Latin echoes still linger, faint and formal. Books with cracked leather spines line the walls, Cicero, Tacitus, Lucretius, Seneca. Ancient names, ancient laments. The kind of company that made Leopardi feel less alone. He devoured the past like someone trying to remember something they'd never actually lived. Rome, for him, wasn't just history, it was heritage. A melancholic inheritance of people who tried really hard, wrote eloquently about failure, and built temples that outlasted their dreams. You run your fingers along the titles. Some of them probably still contain dust from his fingertips. These texts weren't relics. They were sparring partners. Places to test his thoughts against time's best thinkers. Historians still argue whether Leopardi idealized the ancients too much or saw them with painful clarity. He praised them often but never romanticized them. He knew they weren't happier, they were just better at expressing misery in long-form Latin. Take Lucretius, for example. His poem, De Rerum Natura, is basically a cosmic anxiety attack written in verse. Leopardi loved it. A universe without gods. Life ruled by chance. That wasn't scary to him, it was honest. He admired that. The poetry didn't lie. It pointed at the void and said, "Here, sit with this." You imagine him pacing, muttering in Latin, scratching notes into the margins with a quill he probably chewed on. He found in these ancient voices a reflection of his own, disillusioned, precise, and elegant in their despair. One quirky tidbit, he once joked that the ancients suffered nobly because they didn't yet have newspapers to distract them. Their grief was purer, their boredom more intense. No tabloids, just plague and poetry. You take a seat at an old desk, its surface grooved with time. The chair creaks like it's about to recite an epic. You leaf through a translation of Seneca's letters, and for a moment, you understand the strange comfort of antiquity. These writers weren't trying to cheer anyone up. They were offering survival manuals for the soul. Leopardi admired that resilience. Stoics who wept in private but spoke in aphorisms. Poets who knew death wasn't noble, but at least made it sound poetic. They didn't pretend to fix pain. They made it articulate. Which, honestly, is more helpful than most advice columns. Mainstream scholars note that Leopardi often measured modern thought against ancient insight, and found modernity lacking. He didn't think the past was golden. He just thought it was honest. Rome had its flaws, sure, but at least when people despaired, they carved it into stone and recited it at banquets. You smile at the image, a toga-clad philosopher toasting to disappointment. Something about that feels grounding. You look outside. The buildings of Recanati feel small compared to the shadow Rome still casts. But maybe that's the point. The past isn't here to crush you, it's here to remind you that your suffering is not new. That others came before with the same sigh, the same stare into the sky, the same awkward silence after someone asked, "Are you okay?" Historians still debate how much Leopardi saw himself as a modern man. He certainly didn't fit neatly into any era. Too ancient for the Romantics, too poetic for the rationalists, too sincere for the cynics. But in the company of Rome, he felt less displaced. The ruins welcomed him. You close the book in your lap. It smells like dust and old hope. Maybe that's all philosophy ever is, people trying to build something permanent in a world that eats permanence for breakfast. And yet, we keep reading. Keep writing. Keep whispering across centuries. Like Leopardi did. Like you just did. It's dark now, but you're still walking, drawn by something you can't quite name. Your steps carry you to a quiet hill just outside the village. There's no trail, only intuition, and an occasional rustle in the grass. Above, the moon hangs like an old secret no one's quite brave enough to ask about. Leopardi watched this same moon. Many times. In many moods. Sometimes as a companion, sometimes as a mirror, but never as a friend. You stop in a clearing, your breath visible in the cool air. The sky is clear, and the stars blink indifferently. But it's the moon that holds you. Pale, whole, silent. A gaze that sees but does not care. In one of his most haunting poems, Canto Notturno di un Pastor Errante dell'Asia, Leopardi imagines a shepherd speaking to the moon. He asks, "What does life mean? Why are we born? Why do we suffer?" The moon, of course, says nothing. She just glows. Historians still argue whether the moon was meant to symbolize nature, eternity, or just indifference dressed up as beauty. What's certain is that Leopardi felt seen by her, but not understood. The moon noticed his presence but didn't offer a reason for it. You lie down in the grass. The blades are cool against your neck. A breeze hums low. You stare at the moon and understand, if only for a moment, what it means to be witnessed by something vast and unfeeling. Leopardi wasn't frightened by this. He found a strange comfort in the moon's apathy. Unlike people, she didn't pretend to care. She didn't judge. She didn't lie. She just existed, perfectly aloof, perfectly consistent. One quirky tidbit, he once wrote that if the moon had a voice, she would be tired. Not cruel, just weary from watching generations of humans ask the same questions with different accents. You imagine that now. The moon looking down, listening to your thoughts, your fears, your quiet wondering. And then just blinking, as if to say, "Yes, I've heard it all before." There's something poetic in that dismissal. Not coldness, but perspective. Leopardi understood that the universe doesn't owe you meaning. It just offers itself, silent, spinning, distant, and leaves you to sort out the rest. Mainstream readings of his lunar poems often miss this nuance. They paint him as hopeless. But really, he was simply uninterested in consolation. He didn't want a lullaby. He wanted honesty. You sit up, the wind picking up slightly. The moon doesn't move, but she seems closer somehow. Like she's hovering just above the edge of comprehension. You want to ask her something. Instead, you say nothing. That's what Leopardi did. He stopped asking and started observing. Historians still debate whether that shift marked resignation or awakening. Maybe both. Or maybe he just got tired of writing unanswered questions into the sky. You dust yourself off and stand. One last look at the moon. She hasn't changed. That's what makes her such a perfect backdrop to human fragility. We shift, collapse, rebuild, while she just watches, blank and beautiful. You begin walking back, the moonlight paving a path with no direction. There are no answers here. But there is calm. A stillness that doesn't pretend to fix anything, yet feels like a balm anyway. And maybe that's enough. The moon sees you. She just doesn't care. And strangely, that makes her the most honest thing in your life. You find yourself inside again, this time in a room smaller than the rest. The ceiling sags a little. The chair is harder. A cane leans against the desk, and folded linens rest on the bed like they're waiting for someone who always returns aching. This is the room where Leopardi lived with his body. A body that betrayed him early and often. From his teenage years, he suffered from scoliosis, chronic pain, poor eyesight, and a respiratory condition that made walking across a room feel like climbing a mountain. He once described himself, with unflinching accuracy, as a hunchback crippled by study and sadness. Historians still debate whether his ailments worsened due to obsessive overwork, or if they were unavoidable. But there's little debate about their effect. His physical suffering became inseparable from his philosophical vision. You sit on the edge of the bed. It creaks, a protest. You imagine young Giacomo sitting just as you are, back curled, spine on fire, eyes strained from candlelight and Latin. The world asked him to be normal. His body said otherwise. He didn't romanticize his pain. He didn't use it as inspiration. He simply carried it, with resentment, yes, but also with focus. If life was going to hurt anyway, he might as well get some thinking done. One quirky tidbit, Leopardi kept a journal specifically for tracking his physical symptoms, like a 19th century version of a health app, but with better vocabulary. He rated aches and logged fatigue, as if trying to turn misery into data. You walk to the window. It's low, almost eye level. Probably adjusted for someone who couldn't stand tall. Outside, kids run. You hear their laughter echo faintly. Leopardi would have listened, half envious, half dismissive. He didn't despise joy, he just didn't believe in its permanence. Mainstream scholars often separate his poetry from his pain, but that's a mistake. His physical suffering gave him an early, intimate knowledge of limits. Of mortality. Of how the body shapes what the mind dares to imagine. Leopardi wasn't a martyr. He didn't seek sympathy. In fact, he often made jokes at his own expense. He once said his body was perfectly suited to philosophy, because it made all other careers impossible. You smile at that. Not out of mockery, but recognition. There's a sharp humor in that kind of honesty. The same way someone might laugh when it rains, because at least they didn't water the garden. Historians still argue whether his mind would have flown higher in a healthier body. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it flew exactly because it was caged. Pain has a way of narrowing focus. Of forcing you inward until your imagination becomes your only open field. You look around the room again. Sparse. Clean. Dim, not a place for dreaming, but for enduring. And yet, dream he did. Wrote he did. While his bones ached and his joints stiffened, his pen moved. You wonder how many of his most profound lines were written during a fever. How many metaphors arrived between gasps. How many verses were whispered into paper by a man too tired to speak aloud. Leopardi didn't pretend suffering ennobled him. He knew it wore him down. But he refused to let it silence him. That defiance, quiet, constant, is what kept his mind sharp while his body dulled. You turn from the window and sit again. The room doesn't feel tragic. It feels real. Honest. It holds no illusions about strength. Only the quiet triumph of someone who refused to stop thinking just because he hurt. And in that way, pain didn't define him. It clarified him. Like heat shapes metal, Leopardi's body shaped his brilliance, not in spite of the pain, but through it. You walk into a narrow parlor. The kind of room meant for visitors, but rarely used. The furniture sits politely, too symmetrical to feel lived in. There's a tea set no one drinks from. A coat hook with no coat. A loneliness pretending to host. This is where Leopardi tried to connect. Despite his public image as a recluse, he wasn't immune to friendship. He wrote letters, hundreds of them. Held debates. Shared ideas. And occasionally, found someone who didn't just tolerate his bleak outlook but admired it. You take a seat on a stiff armchair, its cushion whispering secrets in the language of flattened springs. Across from you, an empty chair. You imagine Giacomo sitting there, head tilted, asking, "So, do you also feel like hope is a prank?" His most enduring friendship was with Antonio Ranieri, a fellow writer, a bit of a libertine, and one of the few people who didn't flinch at Leopardi's intensity. They lived together for a time in Naples. Shared meals. Argued about philosophy. Possibly shared more. Historians still debate the nature of their relationship. Were they just friends? Was there something deeper? The letters are affectionate, sometimes tender. But Leopardi was careful, cautious. If there was a confession, it's buried in metaphors. One quirky tidbit: despite their closeness, Leopardi and Ranieri had frequent fallings out. Once, Ranieri accused him of being too gloomy at dinner. Leopardi replied, "At least I bring seasoning to the table." You smile. The man was a mood, but he had wit. He didn't want pity. He wanted a worthy sparring partner. Someone who didn't offer empty reassurances but challenged him with honesty. Or at least didn't blink when he said, "All is suffering." He found that in rare people. And when he did, he held on, sometimes too tightly. His friendships, like his thoughts, were intense. Overwhelming. He didn't small talk. He soul talked. Mainstream history tends to emphasize his solitude, but that's only part of the story. Yes, he was often alone. But he wasn't misanthropic. He believed in connection. He just found most of it hollow. You think of your own relationships. The people you laugh with, and the people you can sit silently beside. Leopardi longed for the second kind. The ones who didn't try to fix him. Just stayed. In one letter, he wrote, "To be understood once is enough. To be known, even briefly, is a miracle." That's not a complaint. It's gratitude hidden in ache. You rise and wander to the fireplace. It hasn't been used in years. Dust coats the grate. But you can almost hear the crackle of wood, the warmth of two minds finding each other across a cup of something hot. Historians still argue whether Leopardi ever truly trusted anyone. But maybe trust wasn't the goal. Maybe what he wanted was presence. Someone to witness the unraveling without offering a solution. And maybe that's why his writing still connects. It doesn't lecture. It sits beside you. Lets you feel seen. Even in silence. You return to your chair. The cushion hasn't gotten any softer. But the room feels less cold now. As if someone, somewhere, is listening. You don't need many people. Just one who doesn't flinch when you say, "I'm not okay." You walk a final time into the open air. The stars blink like tired eyes. The wind has quieted. Even the town seems to pause. Everything settles, like dust on an unopened book. You find yourself in a field. The same one from before, perhaps. Or maybe a new one. With Leopardi, it's hard to tell, everywhere becomes a metaphor eventually. The grass is taller than it should be. The sky, wider. This is where he ended up. Not in triumph. Not in despair. But in something softer, acceptance without illusion. He knew he would never be healed. He knew the answers wouldn't come. But he also knew that the not knowing had a rhythm. And in that rhythm, there was something close to peace. You sit down. No grand thoughts now. Just a quiet breath. Leopardi wrote, late in life, about the beauty of small things. A breeze. A child's laughter. A shadow on the wall. Not because he thought they held hidden truths, but because they didn't pretend to. They just were. Historians still debate whether he softened with age. Whether his final works show warmth or resignation. But reading them, you don't feel defeat. You feel stillness. Like someone who stopped running, not from pain, but toward answers. He once said that illusions are necessary, but serenity comes from letting them go. Not violently. Not bitterly. Just, releasing them. Like birds from an open hand. One quirky tidbit, his final poem was about a broom. Yes, a literal broom. Growing from volcanic soil. Resilient. Fragile. Beautiful in its refusal to pretend. Just like him. You lie back in the grass. The earth is cool beneath you. You feel small, but not crushed. The sky doesn't answer. The moon doesn't wave. And that's okay. Because you're not here for answers anymore. You're here to listen to the quiet. To rest beside a man who looked at life honestly, and still kept writing. Still kept walking. Still kept watching the stars, even when they didn't blink back. Now let's ease into sleep, together. No more questions. No more metaphors. Just gentle dark and a breath that deepens. The world grows quiet, not because it changes, but because your eyes begin to close. You're safe now. No need to chase. No need to prove. Just let go, like Leopardi did, not in despair, but with the calm understanding that you were never meant to carry all of this alone. You've listened. You've wandered. You've wondered. That's enough. The stars are still there. The moon still glows. But they can wait. Now is your time to drift. Softly. Slowly. Into the infinite. End of script. Sweet dreams.